Also, I'm Google developer expert about web technologies and cloud technologies. So if you would be interested in to talk about Chrome, Chrome OS, Chrome platform, or progressive web apps, Angular, Polymer, and other interesting technologies, just come to me and I will glad to share. Also, in this talk, Alex will assist me in giving this presentation. So, can you
Hello everyone, my name is Alex Bohonko. I'm a co-worker with Valentyn at Winfield's project. And basically I owe Valentyn the acquaintance with Angular 1, since he was the only person who promoted this technology back that time, and he was the one who started to use it in the production. So basically, how many people are experienced here with Angular 1 also? Oh, that's much. And does anyone have a chance to maybe look over Angular 2, maybe even to write something? Whoa, pretty much. Cool. So, Valentyn, what can you say about Angular 2?
I'm very glad that there are quite a lot of people who already get some initial information about Angular 1, took a look at their template syntax, took a look about how it's work, what is dependency injection. So, in my talk, I will try to give some deeper information about some internals of Angular 2. So those who don't know what is Angular 2 will get some information about it. Also, those who are professional, I saw and doing production applications in Angular 1 and try to Angular 2, will get some tips about how they can make it more productive, more clean. So, what I can say about Angular 2? I can say it's really awesome, and I mean it. As Alex already mentioned, I started working with Angular 2 in the times when it was better when first Angular. And I passed a long life of Angular 1. So a lot of problems of it. Even had a chance to do some commits and was accepted in the repository. So I saw what is Angular 1. Angular 2 is really much better. It's based on the same approaches that was built first Angular, but it looks like the Angular 1 was a kind of pet project. Actually, it was, and this library looks like it was a lot of experiments, how templating should be done, how data binding should be done, how dependency injection, routing, and so on. And of course, it had a lot of problems. With Angular 2, it's so cool that it took all lessons from Angular 1 and tried to solve it absolutely different approach. So, why it's awesome? Why it's so cool? There's a lot of things to talk about Angular 2, but I would like to mention a couple of them. The first one is about that it's super fast. It's really fast. It could be compared to other frameworks that tend to be to solve performance problems like React.js and other. It's I will tell a little bit later why it's even, I think, more effective than high-performance framework. Also, it is very easy to learn. You don't need, it's the template syntax, if you take a look on it. It looks like strange, but if you start using it, you will get acquainted very quickly with it. Also, it is the same community that was in Angular 1. So all these people who work with Angular 1 will or are contributing into Angular 2. And of course, just because it was started not so long ago, it already uses a lot of modern technologies. So let's take a deeper look about what I mean by easy to learn. Sashko, do you know JavaScript?
Sure, I suppose everyone here knows JavaScript.
That's glad to hear. So let's take a look into a piece of JavaScript code. It's even not JavaScript 6. It has no any classes. So let's take a look at this small piece of JavaScript code that define Angular 2 components. So what do you think about it?
Basically, from this chunk of code, I may say that to create Angular 2 component, it takes only a couple of functions from the ng core, and basically that's it. It's pretty much straightforward, though it is too verbose. So, I don't know, maybe you know other ways how can we achieve the same result by the less code?
Yes, it is a lot of things you need to write. And to make it more easier, as you can see, for example, it defined class by invoking class function. But in a modern JavaScript and some other languages, you can have the native support of classes, for example. So, other option, instead of writing all this pure old JavaScript code, you can use a TypeScript. And with the TypeScript, the same definition of the component that was in a previous slide would looks like this.
For sure, it's much more, it's less code, also it's more readable, but I have a question here. What does this @ sign next to component mean?
This @ sign, it's actually annotation, what is called in a Java world, for example, that's the way how we can attach additional information to the pure class. For see, app component class is just a class without anything, and we need to let know Angular that it is not just simple class, it is a definition of the component. So we attach some additional information like selector and template to this class. So all instances of this class will have this additional information, letting know Angular that how to render, how to use this class. But we can do even better. We can use Dart, and I really like Dart. So take a look at the same definition of the component written in a Dart.
Okay, though Dart is a very cool language, I see no difference. So what is this all about? Why not to use TypeScript?
The interesting part that there is mostly no difference. And it is one of the coolest things with the Dart, that if you want to start using Dart, you don't need to learn new language. You don't need to learn new syntax. You can just adapt or what you know already by developing JavaScript or Java code or C# code, and write Dart script. As you can see, this piece of code can be easily read and understandable by all developers who developed JavaScript, C# or Java code. But what the good thing in the Dart, if you ever try to use a TypeScript in your real-world application, real-life application, I can, or more or less big, and when you have to do some adjustment to standard flow of building it, you will have to select what to use. For example, if you use a Node.js, you can use a Gulp, Grunt, Webpack, Broccoli, other builders. Each of them has its own benefits, problems. With the Dart, you have all this bundled in USDK. So you just download the SDK and you already immediately can start building Angular 2 on any other application. It's really good. Unfortunately, Dart is not a primary scope of my talk. I hope you'll have a chance to visit some of my other talks about Dart and workshops and so on. So in the next slides, I will give samples in TypeScript and sometimes in a Dart. It is up to you to understand where is the TypeScript and a Dart. So it will be an interesting quest for you. So another cool thing is a change detection. Sashko, what do you think about change detection of Angular 1?
So basically, I worked for a while with Angular 1. It's a really cool framework with the out-of-the-box features. It's good for single-page applications, but we struggle a lot of problems when it comes when it grows with the components. It becomes sluggish because of these different mechanisms for change detection. Basically, it becomes sluggish because of the watchers, and sometimes it leads to infinite loops, and you may also be aware of the error that infinite digest loop reached aborting or something like that. So it's really pain, and I hope that in Angular 2 architects solve this issue.
You're completely right. In Angular 1, there were a lot of problems with the change detection. As you remember, until 1.3, as I remember, maybe I'm wrong, there were no any way how to do one-way binding. So all bindings were done and checked each digest loop. That brings a lot of performance problems. And the biggest performance problems you can see on the left part, that if there could be some cycles in this graph. So components can depend on each other, and during change detection phase, Angular 1 was not able to track was all changes. For example, in the second component, we do some changes that should be reflected in the first component. So Angular 1 did a lot of times change detection phase to make sure that there is no changes done after the each loop. And of course, it took quite a lot of time. With the Angular 2, they decided to do it completely different. They decided to do all components are checked only in one direction, from the top to the bottom components. So each time Angular needs to change or to detect changes on the view, it's just do one pass from the top to the bottom. That's really cool mechanism that's make a change detection extremely fast. Moreover, you can mark some parts of this graph as immutable, making Angular skip some of the graph. That's if you start using some technologies or some approaches from other libraries like Redux, it make change detection in Angular 2 even faster. So another cool thing in Angular 2 that many of you could skip or didn't knew about previously, it's ahead of time compilation. So Sashko, can you take a look on the first sample of Angular 1 code and tell how Angular 1 processes this code or template?
Basically, I suppose that all of you are aware of the fact how the Angular processes the template. When Angular 1 sees this template, it starts to parse and also to process it with the compiler service. And when it sees another directives inside of this ng-repeat, it also starts to parse and to process. If there are other directives, it also starts the same process, parsing, parsing, and parsing again. So
yeah, that's right. During when Angular 1 tried to visualize our first template, it do parse of the internals of this. It use a compile service to compile it and do it a lot of times. In Angular 2, the same functionality could be pre-compiled on a build stage, so not on a client's browsers or mobiles. They could be on a developer machine or build machine to produce code like this.
But it doesn't look, how to say, it's much more code. I don't think that, how can it be much more faster?
This looks like it's much complexer, of course, but with when JavaScript machine processes this code, they already know all references to all elements in our template. So during runtime, they don't need to look for a template. They don't need to parse internals of all template. We already have a reference for each element, each piece of template inside of it. So on a runtime, JavaScript machine just execute this code and we have all elements. We can easily manipulate, we can hide, we can show, we can change attributes of these elements. What we have with this code, with this approach, that we can do time checking in templates. So for example, if you forget to close some tag, the ahead of time compilation will produce an error that something wrong with this template. Or you forget ng4 syntax and did some mistake there, it's during the compile time will produce error. So not user will see something wrong with your app and you will see when building. Also, it allows to do a tree shaking.
What does the tree shaking means?
The tree shaking is the way how we can drop all unused code. So, for example, if you import UI Bootstrap or other big library, you will have imported a lot of directives that you will not use or not used in your application. With the tree shaking, we can, and if we have our template compiled in this way, we know which templates are actually used, which directives and components are really used in your application, and just drop away all other applications. Also, this code is CSP friendly. CSP is a security mechanism that allows to write or to execute some JavaScript code more safely. For example, when you write a Chrome application or Chrome extension, you cannot use a lot of dynamic things like eval and other things. With this part, you can write your applications from Chrome extension to Chrome extension, web application, and so on. And last but not least, that when you pre-compiled all your templates, the browser, client browser, will not execute all these parsing steps. And most important, that you don't need a Angular 2 compiler. It's already been used during build time. And compiler is about 30–40% of Angular 2 code. So you can drop away all unused components. You can drop away compiler, and you have much slimmer application that will be much faster bootstrapped in your code. That's a really cool thing. And I already mentioned that Angular, based on the same community, is the same people. So there is a statistic from a Libstat website that currently Angular is used more than 12,000 application or websites parsed by this. It's very approximate, but still gives quite a good. I can say the React is less used. The only big library that I know that's JavaScript or jQuery, but it's a legacy. So, next thing that's cool is awesome in Angular 2, that it's really have a mature architecture. I know those who tried Angular 2 on their first stages, like a beta 10, beta 12, beta 18, they saw that there is a lot of internal breaking changes introduced. That's because during all this time, guys in the Angular team did try to find really best solution for writing application. As you know, first Angular was introduced in 2009, and the first commit of second Angular was done in 2014. So all these years was developing first. Now there's 2 years passed from the first commit. During these 2 years, Angular team did a lot of investigation, research, and come out with the architectures that you will see and you can use right now. Also, it uses all modern technologies approaches to building a web application. We already have mentioned about that you can write in a JavaScript, into Dart, and using Typescript. Also, it's embrace such thing as a progressive web apps. For example, you can pre-build, pre-compile your template for bootstrapping or building shell, and it would be immediately loaded on mobile devices from cache. And also it can use web workers. Modern computers don't have, all have more than one core. Or even now mobiles has about 4 cores. So with these technologies, I will talk how it could be used. Angular 2 can utilize all these advanced features of the devices. Oh, sorry. What's happened?
Sorry for inconveniences.
Also, another good thing is about web components. Now, like Polymer, a lot of libraries use them, and they are really good, and I will talk a little bit later about that. And the last, that you can write Angular 2 applications for mobile, native mobile application, not using WebKey, WebView, or other hybrid way, though you can use it as well. So, let's now have a little bit deeper dive into what's advanced features of Angular 2. First, I would start with the model. This thing was introduced in last RCs and gives a really nice way how you can define building blocks of your application. So this is the basic syntax or main parts of the model. As you can see, we can import other models as building blocks. Of course, it's important to have availability to import or to use other models. Also, it can define which declarations are used within this model. Also, it can define some components that we exported to use for other models. It can define providers that would be that used inside of these models and also exported. And for a main component and only main components or root component, you can define a bootstrap component or a root model. Sorry, that bootstrap component that will be used to start up your application. So let's take a look into the source example of a main model. You can see we use import browser model. This is very important model that has some core directives like ngIf, ngFor, and other directives that used by all Angular 2 applications. But also they have some additional functionality to manipulate with the browser. Interesting that if you write a native script application, instead of browser model, you can import native model, and you will have the same. You can use the same code, but it will work on as a native application. Also, we can define that our main model have a couple of components, like app component and some highlight directive. Also, we have some servers, and we bootstrap application with the app component. Here is a sample of template to use this main model. You can see we have a user list that would be defined in our user model. And here's the source of the user model. So it's quite same as a main model. You can see that we import common model. As I said, it's a modular that defines some core directives in ngIf. Also, we use forms. We internally have user list component. We internally have user components, some money pipe, highlight directive, some, we export only one component, user list component, and we have some servers manipulate with the components. So it looks nice.
But Valentyn, no offense, we know that you are a great expert, but if to look on this code, I may see that you did some mistake.
Really?
Yes, you just inserted highlight directive into two models. As far as I understand, in Angular 1, if you are inserting or adding directive with the same name into different modules, they will override. For instance, the directive, highlight directive inside of the common module will override the highlight directive definition in the main module.
Yeah, that's right. In Angular 2 or Angular 1, if we have directive with the same name defined in different models, it will be overwritten. And to solve this problem, we need to prepend some prefixes to our directives. For example, UI bootstrap have all these UI prefixes to all directives and so on. With Angular 2, much easier. We can have the scope declarations only internal directives that used inside of this model, unless we export it to usage of some outer scope. So, for example, main model imports our users model with a highlight directive, but it is not overridden. Internal highlight directive or main model is not overridden and solves quite easy problems of the namespacing. Okay. Here's another great thing with the Angular 2. Actually, this definition of routes. You can see that my main route have some dashboards that is by default loaded, and we have route to users, and users has a load children property. Load children property tell Angular 2 to lazily download other model and start. So if user navigate to users URL, it will download users model and pass navigation to there. And our users model have defined a couple of paths that's available just inside of this model. That's a really nice thing. As you remember, in the first Angular, we had to use a different hacks to do the same. With the second Angular, it's natively support. So if your application starts growing more and more and more, you can still leave your dashboard like a core path loaded immediately, and only if user navigates to some advanced functionality, you can lazy load some other models. So I hope you already got some quite interesting tips of about Angular 2. So let's take a little bit breath and recap what we just heard. So Sashko, how do you like?
Yeah, we may see that Angular 2 is quite interesting, quite fast, and also it's quite easy to learn. I mean, basics. Yeah, of course, there are some steep learning curves, but yeah. So in order to wrap up something, I may say that we've learned how to create components using the very slim and very easy to learn syntax. Also, we learned something new, the module system, though we know that Angular 1 also has this module system. Here in Angular 2, it's more advanced and gives you a lot of flexibility, such as lazy loading, as Valentyn told us, because in order to perform lazy loading in Angular 1, it takes a lot of effort and additional complexity with the help of other frameworks and so on, etc.
I can say that's not all. There's a lot of nice other things I would like to mention. The first, it's renderer. Renderer, it's really cool in Angular 2 because they did a very simple thing. They just split it, the process of working of your application, into two different parts, two separated parts. First, it's an internal application. Actually, it's a JavaScript, Typescript, Dart code that been executed, written by you or by other authors. And second part, it's part that presents your application to the user, that accept events from the user and responsible for the interaction of this. So we have two separated parts, but introducing, dividing this. That's look cool.
Okay, but to me it sounds a bit complex. You know, it's additional abstraction. It also poses additional complexity. So why do we have to use this render service or whatever it is called?
You're right. Quite often, introducing additional layers in application brings to difficulties to read. You need to introduce some interfaces, and the communication becomes quite hard. But I think it's worth to do so because we can use a web workers. We can run our application in a separate thread, not main thread of our rendering. So our application still very smoothly, user can scroll it, easy, resize and do all the things. It not affect the main thread of the execution. For example, if you get a lot of data from your backend, you need to process, you need to manipulate on it, and this will not affect on the main rendering thread. Another cool thing that we can do a server-side rendering. So we can prepare our application for the user on a server side, and this can be done without a real browser. So we can do a very nice testing of the application. We can prepare some information even for search engines. Previously it was extremely hard to do so. And as already mentioned a couple of times, we can use a native script to produce a native apps without browser at all. the separation. So there's a small code that demonstrates how we can use a renderer to change some element or style on our application. So
basically in Angular 1 we used ILM or element service in order to manipulate directly with the DOM element. So here this additional complexity I was talking about, why do we have to use this render here?
The good thing with the syntax that when Angular executes this piece of code in a web worker where there is no DOM access at all, you cannot manipulate on the DOM elements, you can it send a message to the main thread to change DOM elements. In this way, the part of renderer that resides on a main thread knows that elements should be changed. And if you don't have any DOM elements, so you then cannot modify. For example, in native apps, we don't have a DOM elements. We have a native components like a button, like different views. You can notify native script that it should change the color of some native components. And let's talk a little bit about components. The components has this very nice properties that it can be a web components, native web components. It can be emulated if there is no native support, and they can have no any isolation. Let's talk a little bit about the first part. So here's an example of components in Angular 2. Does it look familiar for you, Sashko?
Of course, it looks familiar. We had this piece of code written at the very beginning, but I see you've added additional property. It is called styles. But it confuses me a bit. And what can you tell also, guys? We have a div here which colored in red. So does it mean that all the divs will be colored in red?
It could be awful if your application would be all in red. Of course not. The good part that our web components have a style isolation. So if you define some styling of your components, this styles affects only on the elements within your component. So how it is achieved? As you can see, Angular 2 automatically append the attributes like ng contents 1 to the div element, and it appends the style to the head elements, and with added selector to this ng component 1. In this way, all styles that you define in your component doesn't affect on any other elements within the application. But if you have a native support for the web components, you can just tell Angular, don't do any emulation, and it will natively use a native web components available in the browser. In this case, you can see the styles appended to the shadow root, so isolated from any other elements on the page. It's very effective and very nice thing. Also, components can communicate between each other. Of course, otherwise your application will be really dumb if you have only one component, and that's all. So you can easily communicate between elements in Angular 2.
I just want to remind you guys the mechanism, how it is achieved in the Angular 1. You're all aware that in order for the child component to interact with its parent, it has to set the required property. So the controller of the parent will be visible inside of the child component. But child components, so is there any mechanism that works reverse? So is it possible for the parent controller to have its childs? We know that in Angular 1, it can't be achieved easily. So is it solved in Angular 2?
It's in Angular 1, parent components could be really easily obtained by adding a required property to the directive definition object. In Angular 2 or in Angular 1, it's extremely hard to get a child components. In Angular 2, there is when you need a parent, you just use a dependency injection, so you can just add to the constructor of our class the type of your parent components. And if you need a child, you can just declare a property, some property, and add viewChild annotation to this property to let Angular pass reference of the child directive to the child component to your component. You can, if you have a lot of components, you can use viewChildren to get these components. By the way, did anyone notice that it is actually Dart code? So the good part of the Dart code that everyone can read it, and everyone. The only difference is that there is a print.
Yes.
But
can you tell us what is the difference? Because it looks like TypeScript.
Yeah, that's...
because from what I see, it's just the print function and also the string format.
Yeah, and only constructor is defined a little bit differently. And as you can see, for example, in our constructor, we use this parent is the same as a TypeScript use immediate definition of the properties and assignment to them. So, and as already mentioned, all our components could be lazy loaded if the model that defines these components also lazy loaded. So, we don't have a lot of time, so I will do a very brief talk about what other very useful things we have in Angular 2. The first helper, the library that allows to develop Angular 2 application is Zone.js. Zone.js allows you to track when the execution path switch between context. For example, you have some timeout, callback that should, so you write some code, then use a set timeout to get callback when after some time. So you interrupt your execution code, execution context, do some other things, and then come back. Zone.js take care that the execution context will be restored. What it gives to Angular 2? It gives a perfect solution to know when Angular 2 should perform dirty checking. So only when we jump out of the execution context, some state of the application could be changed. It could be events, user events. It could be a result of HTTP request. It could be some other synchronous operation from this. So as a result, we get, Angular 2 get rid of such thing as ngClick directive. And now it's just because we've been to some events. We get use of $timeout service because we can use set timeout, set interval, and other things. And we get used in a scope $apply thing.
I'm not sure as you guys, but I'm pretty much excited and happy that there are not going to be these services because it gives me a lot of, how to say, possibility and saves my time, and also it makes me avoid wrapping my code inside of these services to make it work.
Yeah, it's quite a common mistake when you just use some non-Angular code. You just forget to wrap into a $apply. That's really a nice thing. Another good library that I use in Angular 2 is Arix.js. Arix.js actually allows you to do to work with asynchronous data streams. There is a really good article from Gerald Sands, who is present here and will do next talk about asynchronous Arix.js. I would recommend to read a little bit about this. So basically, Arix.js allows you to work with asynchronous data streams.
Okay, you mentioned data, but what about user interaction, user events, for instance, clicks?
The interesting thing that Arix.js mantra that everything is a streams works with Angular 2. So user clicks in the application is represented like a stream of data containing coordinates where user clicks. Or user move mouse. It's also the stream of data that is passed to your application. So everything is a stream. It's a good. So, for example, can you try to write this piece of code? Yeah. Don't have a lot of time, so do it fast.
Basically, I'll try to repeat this code and execute it.
So, Yes, that's interesting thing that it looks very simple. We just create observable and take 5 elements and want to output it. But Sashko said that there is no any output. The reason behind that, this created observable is called observable. Actually, we define the way how to get values, but we didn't ask to get these values. Sashko, can you try to add some subscribers to this?
Yes, like maybe let's try to add more to be sure. I don't know.
Let's
maybe
try.
Let's try 2.
So, wow. And what you get from this?
Yeah, as we can see, I've received 2 this similar result. Basically, the same result, ops value. It was triggered twice. So basically, that is not the desired behavior, I may assume.
Yes, looks like we have a single observable. We just subscribed it twice, and so why we have a couple of ops value outputs? It's just because we created the way how to get a values execution path, and then ask 2 subscribers to execute this execution path. Of course, that is why this do function was executed 2 times. The good, if you don't need it, you can just share your observable with all these 2 subscribers. Can you try to add share function here? So, how do you like it?
It's pretty much what we expect.
That's good.
Basically, with the help of the share method, we've received the result we want to get.
Sometimes it depends on how what observable. Is it data, or is this some execution that you'd be lazy done in later time? So, and last thing that I would like to mention, it's a command line interface. If you, for example, if you already want to start using Dart or using Angular, you can easily, with the TypeScript. With the Dart, it's much easier, actually. With the TypeScript, you can install Angular CLI utility, then you can create a new project, calling ng-new, give some name, and then go to that directory and start serving. As a result, you will have your browser opened your ng application, Angular 2 application. You will have leaf reload. You will have builder configured for you, bundler, and so on. So you can even publish or do a production build of the application. And moreover, you can add new components to your application. You can add new directives. You can add new pipes with the CLI. And the CLI will automatically add new templates or files, style, TypeScript codes or files to put into directory or to folders where they should be. So very easy way how to start and how to do this. Soon they will add a possibility to configure routing of your application with the CLI. So it's a very powerful thing. Unfortunately, there is absolutely not enough time to talk about all other amazing, great things in Angular 2. As I said, I have experience working with software engineering for more than 10 years, 12 years, and I can say that I cannot remember some other library or framework that is so perfectly designed and implemented as Angular 2. So we had talked about the way how the components can be bundled into models, how the render parts is done, how change detection works, how we can use Angular CLI for that. But there is much more thing to learn, to listen about how you can efficiently construct data, access to data, manipulation with the data in Angular 2. Fortunately, you're lucky ones. The next presentation would be exactly about how to work with the data in Angular 2 application. But I would strongly advise you, Sashko, and all others, start reading about forms, about animation, about how routing is done, how you can build hybrid very easily with nice hybrid applications for your mobile device, from Android, for iOS, and of course how you can build a native application. So it's really nice thing. I expect some of you who did not try Angular 2 yet will start trying, and for those who already started, will go to the GitHub repository and try to help with the writing documentation, committing some fixes, or doing some commitments into this great open source project Angular 2. So, thank you for the attendance. I hope you enjoy it.